Hello and welcome to the Prime 10th anniversary conference. And I know you'll be thinking, oh my goodness, 10 years. Who's that? Have we been hacked? No, you haven't been hacked. I am supposed to be here. My name's Tony Kent, and it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the conference. And what I'd like to do is to say thank you to you all for welcoming me into your homes and offices today. And I thought I might like to share with you quite how I fit in and why it might be appropriate for me to be here with you today. So I'm coming to you straight out of Compton, West Berkshire, don't you know? And it is, if I was to characterize it, a very white, rural, upper middle class part of the world. So James Dyson owns all of the farmland around here. You know, man's got to have somewhere to plant all his money. And the village next to us is owned by Lord Iliff. And kind of top tip for you here, if you were to find yourself accidentally trespassing on Lord Iliff's land, and you were to find yourself accidentally coming across him tinkering with his light aircraft, best thing to do is pretend that you don't know who he is. And then you can have a little bit of light conversation with him where he might share with you that he owns shares in Brompton Cycles. It is so middle class around here that our former MP was the richest member of parliament when he represented our constituency. And as for myself, wow, I'm so middle class that I like to demonstrate my commitment to sustainable practices by sticking a great big electric charging point on the front of my house, just to let you know I'm saving the planet. And we have our vegetables delivered by Riverford. And I like to leave those on the doorstep just a little bit longer than is strictly necessary so everyone can see it's organic. And if you were to meet me with my dogs, I bypassed the cockapoo phase, went straight for 2 hunting dogs, Hungarian visitors, don't you know? So if you would spot me out there walking the 2 of them, being dragged by the 2 of them, it's perfectly acceptable to say, will you train them to the gun? And I'll know how to respond to that. And you might be thinking, well, Tony, I mean, why would you make fun of things that most of us think quite nice to have, you know, a little bit judgmental of you? And the reason for doing that is because I was never meant to live here. And whilst you might think that I would potentially fit in, if you haven't by now already thought, oh my goodness, incredibly boring, I would potentially fit in polite conversation. You wouldn't have wanted me anywhere near your house or your business when I was a teenager, because I was, how do I put this? Very light fingered when I was 14, 16. So that nice Mont Blanc pen or your Fabergé eggs, I mean, I don't know how high you're rolling right now. They might be going straight into my handbag coat pocket down the sleeve. And I'm thinking I'm going to pay for this. But why would I tell you what I used to get up to when I was a teenager? And I feel safe in doing that because I know that you know that behaviour like shoplifting to order doesn't just come from anywhere. And I was born and brought up on a council estate in Basingstoke, very working class, classic upbringing, 2 parents, 4 kids, 3-bedroom house. Both my parents worked, but were on very, very low income. And the newspaper that we bought, because it wasn't a reading newspaper, was the Sun. So every day of my childhood, I got a big pair of backs on the breakfast table, just to let me know as a working class girl, when you grow up, you are supposed to be 36, 24, 36. We would judge you by how you look and how you're measured, not by what's going on up here. And most of the families had children about the same age. Most of the adults worked in the same places. And the thing that I hadn't really appreciated was just how little we got by on until my dad did something that changed our social standing. That was he died. Like, thanks, Dad. And we went from being low income to no income, apart from a small payoff, which we used to do something that people love to get judgmental about. We got Sky Television. So you can imagine, oh my goodness, look at Julie, all those kids running around, not properly dressed, but they've got Sky Telly. How dare they have something to enjoy? So we had a bit of Sky Television. Um, and my siblings were all younger than me. So I did get involved in helping with the childcare and helping sort the house out. But I also went in for a bit of drinking, smoking, drugs, and putting things in my mouth and up my sleeves that had no business to be there. And at that point, I was sitting my GCSEs. I wasn't paying much attention. And by the time I was 15, 16, a lot of my peers were becoming pregnant, having babies or having abortions. So it seems that while drugs and alcohol were in ready supply, contraception, not so much. And I think my mum was worried about that outcome for me. So she did something to make sure that I didn't get pregnant. She took one for the team. So my mum had two more children and remained a single parent, and she decided that I would be her birthing partner. So if anyone needs a doula, I am here for you. So by the time I was 18, we were single parent, 6 children, no parental income, social services involvement because my half brother was born with a number of disabilities. There's a lot going on. And you're probably thinking, goodness me, Tony, how do you go from being light-fingered nightmare I don't want in my house to someone that I can talk about Verbier and Viognier with? Well, for me, it was all about access to opportunity and a desire to break free. So I decided I didn't want to be poor and I didn't want to have children until I was in a position of financial stability. And the way that I got there was this. The first thing was a second chance at education. So I did get a full-time job when I was 16 in a fruit and veg shop. But then I realized the only way you make money in fruit and veg is if you marry into the Fife banana dynasty, which is not such a stretch because they have a distribution centre in Basingstoke, fun fact. But I went to college. I was good at English. I did English A-level. I did psychology A-level because I wanted to figure out why my family were quite so mad. And I reset my maths. It was from there that I was told I could apply to university, but I couldn't be poor. So thankfully, the college put me on a vocational course, and there I got access to skills that made me employable. So I learned to touch type. I learned how to be in an office environment. So I've got education, skills that made me employable. And then I got a job at Reed Employment in Reading, working for an office full of women that owned their own cars, owned their own houses, had careers, were building something. And I met a girl called Donna. She had a BMW. I was like, oh my God, I want a BMW. She went, you could do that, Tony, if you get a job in sales. So she has shown me what is possible. I've got role models that have got all their clothes on, and they're showing me the way that I need to go. So I've decided to go into sales. I went to work for a freight company. This is not a place for powerful female role models. They thought, judged on the reading material, that women should have no clothes on. However, I gained something massively important in my journey there, in that I was introduced to the man that became my husband. And he showed me the alternative possibilities for family life. So when I met him, I had to give him a briefing document. I could have done with that legal paper because it was like this. I was like, when you meet my family, it's going to be noisy, it's going to be dirty. People aren't going to be wearing any clothes because they know how they're supposed to look. It's going to be chaotic. There could be an emergency happening. And he's like, Tony, I only wanted to take you to the cinema. What is this? But when I met his family, the only piece of advice he gave me was don't touch the walls, Tone, because they've just been decorated. And I was like, that is what a family could look like. So then I see the possibilities there. I'm building my career in sales and I apply to work for a tech company. And there's something about my background there that gave me the edge because I interviewed and they turned me down. And I thought, I'm not having that. One thing I am is tenacious and determined. So I phoned them up and said, why haven't you employed me? And said, do you know what? The person we employed couldn't hack it. It was too tough for them. Come on in, we'll give you a shot. So I started my career in tech. And then I meet a guy there who wants to show me something massive. And I said, Taryn, I've got a boyfriend. I don't want to see your massive whatever it is. And what he actually wanted to show me was his earning potential. So we're on a night out and he showed me his bank balance, and he's got £25,000 just in the bank, and he's 23 years old. And that was the transformational kind of income that I knew I needed to make. So I committed to a career in tech, which led me to 10 years at Microsoft, where I gained so much of that learning around the social, cultural, and all the financial capital that you need to operate in that kind of environment. And throughout that time there were people that showed me the way, but there were also people who were surprised at my background and would say things like, how did you get in here when you're not a graduate? Or are you sure you're related to your family? Or why don't you know how this works? What school did you go to? And so there was so much that I had to learn and go through in that process. And you probably think, well done you, Tony, fantastic. Well, you made it. That's social mobility done, isn't it? But it's not, because I'm one of 6 children and I'm the only one that has done this. I'm the only one that owns my own house. I'm the only one with a pension. I'm the only one that owns my own car. I'm the only one that's done this kind of international travel. I'm the only one that could bump into Lord Iliff, know who he is, pretend not to know who he is, and then have a conversation with him about Brompton cycles. And I'm reminded of a time when I met my brother's former girlfriend, not long after she'd had her first baby. And she was 16 years old and she was crying. And I said to her, why are you so upset? And she said, I didn't want this. She said, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to get into law because I want to help people. And I couldn't help her or show her the way. And there are people like you that can do that for young people who are desperate to find an alternative route out. So I'm delighted to be in your company today. And I'm excited to hear all of the things that you're going to do to not only help bring people in, but show them what their future could be in your industry. And with that, I'd like to hand you over to a short video. Thank you.
I always felt strongly that your ability to progress in life should depend on your ability, on your drive, on your character and your qualities.
The support that Prime provides the firm is immeasurable.
Without Prime, I wonder how much longer it might have taken social mobility to get up that board, that senior leadership agenda.
A Prime scheme is an opportunity for you, for your organisations, to actually handpick some of the best talent out there.
Talent comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes and from all kinds of backgrounds.
When I went to open days, when I went to legal fairs, I realised that everyone applying for law had some kind of experience, which I wasn't given until Prime came along.
The Prime scheme really helped me in securing a career in law.
I would definitely say that my Prime experience definitely did confirm that I wanted to pursue a career in law.
I would argue that if we are more diverse as a workforce and as a sector, we are going to be more human, caring, fun workplaces and a better profession to be a part of, so what's not to like?
After a decade of awareness, we move into a phase of decisively making change.
There's strength in diversity of opinion and diversity of viewpoint.
If we all put our will to the shoulder, we can all make a huge difference to the life and the life outcomes of many otherwise disadvantaged young people. So let's go for it.
Good morning to you all. My name is Nicholas Cheffings and I'm a former partner and Global Chair of Hogan Lovells and currently a senior counsel at the firm, as well as the interim head of legal and company secretary at the Crown Estate. But I'm addressing you now as the executive chair of Prime Commitment, and it is a pleasure to be doing so. I begin with thanks to Tony Kent for what can only be described as a seriously thought-provoking start to Prime's 10th anniversary conference. Thank you, Tony, and thank you also to all of those who contributed to the video we've just seen. And welcome to you all. It's tremendous to have so many of you join us as we mark Prime's 10th anniversary. Today is partly about reflecting on the progress we've made as a profession in the past decade. But more importantly, it's about looking ahead to the action we can take together to ensure that our hard-won progress is built upon and not wasted. Because if we are not mindful, I have to say that much of it could be wasted. We've made enormous strides in broadening access to our firms and widening the talent pool. We've seen significant increases in the number of young people from socioeconomically less advantaged backgrounds qualifying as solicitors in our firms, and our processes are now largely embedded in a number of our firms. That will see this progress continue. But it does not and it cannot stop there. All of that work is undermined if we do not also ensure that those young people are given the same opportunities to progress and to develop, the same opportunities to play an equal part in key client relationships, and to feel that they belong at our firms and that their past is not an impediment to their future. If you have not yet read our anniversary booklet, then please find the time to do so, and please also share it with your colleagues, as many as possible, because we do need to do more to spread the word and to show that the traditional stereotypes are not reflective of what is happening today in your firms. What you've achieved so far is a clear demonstration of what you can achieve in the future. Together, we have already done so much. The statistics are impressive, and they are the result of a concerted effort on the part of Prime's member law firms and our partners to make a difference. And you have made a difference. Over 12,000 weeks of work experience, an average of 750 young people a year experiencing what it is to work in a law firm. That's 7,500 young people who would not previously have had that opportunity to showcase their talent, their ambition, and their potential. That's 7,500 young people that we and our clients would have missed out on. Thank you for that. Without our collective sense of purpose, we would not be where we are today. And I have to say, in my time as executive chair of Prime, I've been struck by the extent to which firms, which are constantly competing to be the best, to attract the best clients, the best work, the best people, are so willing and indeed positively keen to work together to change things for the better. It's hugely impressive, and it is something of which we should be very proud indeed. As we contemplate what more there is to do, I do urge you to retain and build upon that spirit of collaboration, because it is by working together and by learning from each other that we can achieve so much more. Do tap into the breadth of knowledge that we have across our membership. Use the networking opportunities in the break today and after the conference to meet with each other and with our partner organisations, to connect and to carry today's conversations forward. The pandemic has reminded us all that we do not know what the future holds, but we can do our best to prepare for it. In the last 18 months, it has affected our members' ability to deliver work experience clearly. But you've adapted, you've offered virtual work experience, and in doing that, you've created an opportunity to reach even more young people than ever before. There's an opportunity later this morning to discuss how to optimize virtual work experience in our breakout session A. And at Prime, we've had our own experience of having to adapt quickly in our role as coordinator of collective action. Our Cold Spots project was intended to deliver face-to-face workshops in schools where law firms were not previously reaching, in the overlooked suburbs of our major conurbations, in our coastal towns and in more remote rural locations. Places where talent exists, but opportunity so often does not. We didn't want to abandon the project because of the challenges. And we didn't want to abandon those young people. So nearly 30 Prime member firms signed up to deliver these workshops with My Kind of Future, now called Connector. And they introduced over 350 students to the prospect of a career in law. We've also successfully launched our virtual legal work experience program with Forage. And that's free for students to access and gives a flavour of what legal work entails. It's been very well received, with over 300 students already signed up to the program, and was one of Forage's best launch programs. The broader social mobility picture is, as ever, complex and nuanced. The UK ranks 21st in the World Economic Forum Social Mobility Index. Their 2020 report highlights the key role that businesses play in improving social mobility, including through focusing on promoting a culture of meritocracy. And we will be picking up on that and some other themes through our other breakout sessions later this morning. We look at recruitment and selection techniques and tools in breakout session B. We explore the different ways to reach talented students through breakout session C. Much has been said and written about the profession's seeming obsession with Oxbridge graduates and its focus on Russell Group universities at the expense of all others. Some of that is fair, but as ever, the picture is not so black and white. Many of the students we employ from the Russell Group are often from challenged backgrounds and supported by the excellent outreach programs that those universities now run. But let us not ignore the fact that not all the top universities in the Times Good University Guide are Russell Group universities. The University of Strathclyde, for example, a non-Russell Group university, is in the top 10. And some of our member firms are now seeing the benefits of reaching those non-Russell Group students. Please do not ignore that talent that is out there. It's talent which is often associated, as we heard from Tony, with a determination, a resilience, and an ambition which is not always seen in those from more privileged and supported backgrounds. In breakout session D, we focus on progression and how we can retain, develop, and progress individuals from less advantaged backgrounds. And progression is an increasingly important aspect of social mobility. The Bridge Group's Pathways to Partnership report, published last year, found that those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds take on average a year and a half longer to reach partner than their colleagues from higher social groups. And yet, and take a moment to reflect upon this, the same Bridge Group, in its different report on early careers progression in law, concluded that those same partner candidates were the ones most likely to outperform their peers as junior lawyers. So, we're hiring people who outperform at the early stages of their careers, despite not having the same opportunities in life. And yet, we overlook them when it comes to promotion and partnership prospects. What's that all about? Why is that? Is it because of their accent? Is it because of their skin color? Or is it because they can't work a room discussing the Black Run at Courchevel? What is it? Whatever the reason, it makes no sense. Not just morally, but economically. What is the point in investing as much time and money and effort as we do in bringing people in and training people, and then allowing them to leave us because we don't invest in them, we don't invest in their development, and we don't invest them in people and allow them to fulfill their potential and excel? One of the challenges I have to confess we face at Prime is that we did not track data from the outset when we were set up 10 years ago and subsequently. So we're not as well placed as we should be to analyse the product of our collective efforts over the last 10 years. We are now, though, through working with the Bridge Group, going to track the onward journeys of students who have taken Prime work experience. It will take time for this data to be gathered and analysed, and I do want to thank all of our member firms for committing to supporting that initiative and gathering this important information. It will help us to understand what we might need to do differently to be even more impactful. I've mentioned our 4 breakout sessions. These are our opportunities to share experiences, learn from each other, and identify where we can collectively take action on social mobility. We've got a fantastic set of speakers and facilitators, too many to name individually right now, but on behalf of Prime and the Prime Board, I would like to thank each and every one of you for giving time so generously. I'd also specifically like to thank Brodies LLP, and I would like to thank Hogan Lovells and Stock & Boker, who have given significant pro bono support to this event. Thank you to them. A special thanks must go to WorldSpan, our events agency, who have provided the logistical support for today's conference. And so far, at least, are doing a great job. Thanks to them. Our aim today is to celebrate what we have achieved through collaboration and to identify action that we can take collectively to create a future where Prime and organisations like us no longer need to exist. A future where a person's background does not restrict their opportunities. A future where we have a truly diverse profession at all levels. To adopt the words that you heard on the video by Prime's founder, David Morley, to whom I pay a personal tribute for inspiring this movement, let's go for it. Let's focus on demonstrably improving statistics, tangible results, and our impact on social mobility. Let's go for it now as a profession collectively. Society demands that of us, and our clients are increasingly demanding that of us. We have to demand it of ourselves. There is no excuse for leaving this task to other people. We have to step up and we have to be the leaders. That said, we also have to get on with the conference. So thank you again for all that you have done and all you are doing and all that you will continue to do. And thank you for being here today. I'm now going to hand over to my fellow board member, Sarah McDonald of Yum Brands, for our first session of the morning. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Good morning, everyone. I am Sarah McDonald, Chief Legal Officer at KFC Europe, and I'm delighted that we have Tish Christias with us today, GC from Microsoft. Tish is a passionate and driving force for diversity and social mobility in the legal profession and was the original in-house board member before she passed the baton over to myself. So our session is exploring perspectives from GCs and businesses around diversity and social mobility and what we want and need from our law firms. So without further ado, Tish, welcome. And it would be great just to hear from you. It's been a whirlwind of a year. How's it been for you over the last 12 months at Microsoft?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Prime is near and dear to my heart, as you say, having been the first in-house representative on the Prime board. It's been remarkable. It's almost 2 years, right, in terms of the pandemic. And I think the experience I had was one foot in a very empty London existence with kids doing homeschooling, et cetera. And then the other foot in this just unbelievable, fast-paced business with every organization digitally transforming at pace in order to be able to weather the pandemic. So it was a bit of two worlds that I lived in.
And I guess during that time, how did diversity and inclusion and as well as social mobility remain important to you during that pandemic and during that time?
I think it remained so important to us, and we made a really conscious decision not to deprioritize it. There were lots of reasons why to deprioritize. People were juggling an awful lot, but we actually continued with something we have at Microsoft called the Law Firm Diversity Program, where we essentially use our purchasing power to highlight to our panel firms the importance of diversity and inclusion and our requirements to see diversity in their management, in particular in their partnership level and management committee level, but also in the attorneys that do our work. So we went ahead and did our pilot year of that. We're in our second year right now. And so we definitely continued to prioritize it. And I think the part of the reason why is I think the pandemic also just showed how disparate people's lived experiences are, and that those of us who have privilege have immense privilege. And even then, one of my favorite comments on Teams calls during the pandemic was, and no offense, because I work with lots of men that I think are fantastic from an inclusion perspective, but there were lots of times where there were comments like, well, I'm so lucky, I just sit in my back shed all day and my wife takes care of the kids and everything else. And you could just tell they were looking at me like, I wonder how you're doing all of this. So the penny did drop, but I think we just continue to prioritize it. We could see on a daily basis how important it was.
And I know we've had lots of conversations together and, with our peers around that diversity and inclusion and social mobility is no longer a nice to have. It's a business imperative, and we have to demonstrate progress in this area. And you and I talked about education being such a key part of this, that you have to listen and learn first before then going to act and amplify, and making sure everybody has that base level of understanding of what is the issue, feels comfortable talking about it, etc., etc. And then in a way that's the key part, because otherwise you are recruiting diversity, which we have seen some movement in, but bringing in those voices to actually progress and be heard is kind of the next challenge. But it'd be great to hear your thoughts around diversity and why it's important to you in GCs in business.
Right. And so, I think also just building on what I previously said, like the pandemic was also a massive exercise in instructing outside counsel humanely as possible, and making sure that we were taking that on board. So to your education point, educating our external law firms about how we were going to instruct, that we wanted to have diverse teams working on our work. And a couple of things are top of mind there. Diversity and inclusion, I think what law firms in particular need to start thinking about really hard is inclusion, because I think we're getting a pipeline of candidates there, training contracts, et cetera. But I don't think people are staying because I don't think they feel welcome. They don't see themselves in management. They don't see themselves in partners. I've had associates call me and say, I really want to stay on partner track, but I can't see anybody that looks like me here from a social mobility perspective or another diversity element. So that's a little interesting observation, right? That as an outside counsel, you're taking phone calls from people at law firms who don't feel like they're welcome there, and you're begging them to stay because you get really good work from a diverse team who come to the work with a whole range of different backgrounds. And so I think the inclusion part is what's so key. So your education point that you make is really important, because I think genuinely people just don't even understand what it feels like to be excluded, especially at law firms. And a woman who's working on my team right now as a secondee made a fascinating observation for me this last week, which was we're trying to figure out creative ways to our law firm diversity program, other than just reporting, which can be a little tick the box, ways that we can encourage diverse attorneys to come work on our work or be partners on our work. And we thought, well, one idea was maybe let's go speak to their employee groups that maybe they have, LGBTQ plus, then maybe they have a BAME committee, whatever it might be. And we could just go, talk to them and encourage them. And then her observation was, I'm not even too sure if associates know that you do the law firm diversity program. Like the partners might know because they think it's really important to you as a customer, but we're not too sure the associates even know that this exists from a Microsoft perspective. So that just raised a really interesting point for us. I think there's some really very simple, lightweight things that we can do to stay creative. But unless you educate people first and have them even understand what that lived experience might be to feel excluded, I think it's very difficult to sell, because people think, oh, clients don't care. They just want their work done. And I'll pause there, but I have a whole other thought for you on how we instruct work and how we can instruct work to encourage diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Tish. It's so fascinating, all the stuff that you're doing. I mean, the killer question, I guess, is, how are we really doing as a sector, and what do we need to do to ensure Prime and organisations like Prime become redundant and aren't needed in 10 years' time?
Yeah, so I think my short answer is we're way behind where we need to be. Coming from a company that's incredibly data-driven, but quite frankly, I think all companies are incredibly data-driven now in a way that they weren't before. if this was like a business thing that needed to go get done, if this was like a law firm management committee said, we have to achieve this target because we need more diverse voices on our work and we need them to feel included so they stay. And it was like a business deliverable, like the amount of resource and energy and effort and creativity people would put towards it would, I think, get the thing done. Like these are very clever people who are good at getting things done. And so one of my questions in terms of the progress that we're making is there are lots of reasons why it's not working or the pipeline's not there or whatever it might be. But if we were running this as a business and we truly agreed that this was a business imperative, then I think our results would be, I would suggest perhaps our results would be different. I think what clients, so from the client side, one, I think law firms are very soon going to start clocking that this is actually a unique selling position for them. One could imagine all of the firms' websites being, even more robust in terms of like even just their basic reporting and their plans to increase diversity in their management committee or their partnership, for example. I think if they were more open, even if it's not a great story right now, and they were committed to increasing those numbers, again, back to my, if this was a business project, we'd get it done. I think we'd be looking at something slightly different, but I think firms are realizing this isn't just tick the box on RFPs that, oh, I have to report this stuff. They're not going to really care. I think you're going to see people really seek this out and care much more. I certainly, when I instruct, make sure that even if it's like a really urgent thing and we have to get it done, once the emergency has passed, like let's say 24 hours, I pause and I'm like, okay, well, let's think about the longer term team we need on this. Could I have a woman or someone who has any diversity, beyond the team that's been given to me thus far? But I think that's where you're going to start seeing from a law firm perspective is clients are going to instruct in a different way. And this is what I'm really passionate about this year to get done, is helping in-house counsels think about how we could do this more humanely, and appreciating there are always going to be emergencies and really heavy lifts and a team effort to get it done, but being thoughtful about the team that we're instructing. I'll just leave one final thought on this, is that I recently had someone approach me from a law firm to say, we have one Black associate and they're uncomfortable and don't see themselves. And so they're thinking about leaving. What do you think I should do? Huge points for reaching out to me and asking for coaching. And could we think through this together? But it did make me think, like, at the end of the day, these are like your own experience of how you want to be included is probably a really great roadmap to follow on how to include someone else. And so part of my answer back was, make them feel welcome, make them feel valued, take on board their feedback, give them a project to help fix that in the firm, help get their help in recruiting, like everything else. So I do think the less we can, well, I guess the more that we can just think about it from an actual individual human perspective, and less, because I make that huge point on data. Data is super important, but also on a day-to-day basis, really make a conscious effort to think about how to include those who have diverse voices on your team.
Thank you, Tish, so much for sharing your ideas and experiences. I think you're just so inspiring to us all, and such a trailblazer with how you do these things. We're all kind of catching up. But just to leave on some final thoughts from, a raft of GCs who we sort of circulated with to get some views on this topic. The first one is CEOs are pushing GCs to take action, both in their internal team and their external team, to show progress on diversity. And therefore, we need data and metrics for our partner firms to justify them being a match for our organisation. And secondly, this is something that all suppliers and partners are going to be under the microscope on. It's starting to become non-negotiable. But the last thing is, and on a really positive note, that it is those firms that do drive change in a meaningful way quickly will have it as a USP. Those will be the ones that are relevant for our organisations. And those are the firms that are truly going to have an authentic purpose, will be innovative, will win the war on talent. And if you win the war on talent, you're going to get the best work anyway. So it really is not just the right thing to do, but we must do more, we can do more, and we need to do it now. But thank you very much. Thank you, Tish. It's been great to have you. And I'm now handing over to Nick Scott.
Thank you, Sarah.
So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion, which we're going to look at the past, the present, and the future of social mobility, identifying both challenges and opportunities for law firms. My name is Nick Scott, and I'm a board member of Prime. I'm also the managing partner of Brodies LLP, who are the largest law firm in Scotland. But why me? Why am I the host for this discussion? I'm white, I'm middle class, I went to Russell Group University. Okay, I did go to a state school, and I don't think anyone would describe my background as privileged. But nor, I think, would anyone say that my background was less than privileged. So why am I here? Well, first, because I'm the son of a father who himself was the first in his family ever to go to university. His father, in turn, he was a miner. He lost his job. But because of the chances which my father had to be the first in his family to go to university, I, in turn, had opportunities. And as the managing partner of the largest firm in our country, I view it as part of my job to pay those chances forward. And so I'm delighted to be joined by a panel this morning to discuss how each of us do that. And ever keen to make our panel work hard for our audience, I'm going to ask them each, as I introduce them, in one sentence to describe the role which their organisation plays in the social mobility arena. So if you can please join me virtually in welcoming Sarah Atkinson, Chief Exec of the Social Mobility Foundation. Good morning, Sarah.
Apologies on mute there. Morning, Nick. Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm Chief Executive of the Social Mobility Foundation. We're involved in social mobility in 3 different ways. We support young people to get work experience, mentoring and career opportunities with a range of sectors, including lots of law firms who are here today as part of Prime. We also run the Social Mobility Employer Index. We benchmark employers, again, including a lot of the firms here today, on their social mobility practice and share insight, and we advocate and campaign for greater awareness and greater action on social mobility through the Department for Opportunities. Lovely to join you today.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sana Shafi, founder of Strive, also associate at Kirkland, Ellis. Good morning, Sana.
Morning, Nick. Thank you very much for having me. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sandra. I am the founder of Strive. This is a diversity organization. We've recently become a charity over the past couple of months. And what we do is we're just here to try and help bridge the gap in the legal industry. And a core part of what we do is really on the social mobility front. And for us, it's all about education. So educating the disadvantaged students in particular, which is our focus group, about the opportunities that are present, helping them to stand out and working with law firms to try and identify talent that they wouldn't normally identify as talent, and helping them to come in front of them and vice versa, just creating a platform where employers can find a very niche group of students that they wouldn't typically come across in their normal outreach programs. And for us, it's all about trying to really bring social mobility to the forefront. So moving away from just one type of diversity where it's very surface level to really deep dive diversity where we're looking into like backgrounds, upbringing, education, class, culture, religion, as well as neurodiversity. So really looking at, and I suppose you could call it contextual diversity, or rather contextual recruitment, but going beyond the data and trying to create really trying to understand what that data is trying to tell us. So that's what we do. This is our 3rd year running, and so far we've been able to place over 100 students with really great law firms, a lot of which are here today. So that's a little bit about me and what we do.
Very much. And Arun, fellow colleague at Kirkland and Ellis, also Prime board member yourself and co-chair of our alumni advisory group. Good morning, Arun.
Morning. Yeah, as Nick said, I'm a current trainee solicitor and Prime board member, and I actually did a Prime scheme a few years back, which I look forward to speaking a bit about later.
Thank you, Arun, and congratulations as well for everyone's knowledge. Arun, I think, has been working most of the evening and the night, so thank you very much for your stamina. James Turner, Chief Executive of the Sutton Trust. Good morning, James.
Morning, Nick. Morning, everybody. I'm Chief Executive of the Sutton Trust. We were set up 25 years ago to promote social mobility, and we do that by working with 7,000 or 8,000 young people directly every year, but we also have a research and policy arm, which is about trying to I guess keep social mobility at the top of the agenda, but also push for systematic change. And I guess specifically for this morning, we are really proud to have been one of the founders of Prime 10 years ago. So a big happy birthday to Prime from everyone at the Trust.
Thank you very much, James. And Sandra Wallace, former Joint Chair of the Social Mobility Commission and also here in our capacity at DLA as MD for UK and Europe. Good morning, Sandra.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. A pleasure to be here. And again, another founding member of Prime. DLA law firm, we have been working on the social mobility agenda for many years now, principally through our Head Start programme, but also more recently through our Solicitor apprenticeship scheme. We are also looking at various ways to champion diversity in terms of our advocating on the agenda. I'm a member of the task force looking at social economic diversity at progression levels in financial services with the City of London Corporation as well as my firm kindly allowed me to be a commissioner at the Social Mobility Commission for the last 3 years. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Sandra, and we'll come on maybe to a bit about the Commission itself during the discussion. So good morning to each of our panel. One last introduction in what has to be a first for me, certainly on a Zoom call. We are joined by Katie Chappell. She is our illustrator, and she is illustrating this morning's events as we go along. I hope we can see Katie. Hello, Katie. And can we see the work that you're doing? I'm so glad, by the way, I should say that I'm wearing a white shirt this morning, just in case that gets captured for posterity. So good morning, everyone. Let us get started. And James, you made the point, a 10th anniversary. Thank you very much for those birthday wishes. This conference marks that 10th anniversary. I'd like to reflect a little bit, just as we start, about what's changed in that time, both in the legal profession, but also in the wider social mobility arena. So James, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. I guess in addressing that question, it's quite important to distinguish between sort of activity and focus and then actually real change for the young people we want to work with in terms of their opportunities improving, because there's no doubt, I think, over the last 10 years and certainly over the last 25 years that social mobility has been sort of catapulted into the national consciousness. So when the Trust was founded, no one was talking about social mobility apart from a few academics. You know, we look back at Hansard actually recently, and in the early 2000s, there were sort of 5 or 6 mentions every year in Parliament of the term social mobility. Fast forward to last year, and there was something like 500 mentions and 15 debates. So it's on the lips of all policymakers, which I think is generally a good thing, but it does come with some downsides as well, which we might get onto. But certainly, I guess that momentum is also reflected in the corporate world, and like many others on this call, you know, we've definitely seen through our work more engagement with this agenda. Socioeconomic diversity started to being treated as importantly as other forms of diversity, and us being more sophisticated about how all these different factors intersect in terms of a young person's opportunities. And I do think also from our experience, that's not just rhetoric, it's certainly been backed up by action. So again, drawing on an example from the Trust, when we set up Pathways to Law, which helps about 400 young people every year and is part of the Prime commitment in the mid-2000s, it was pretty much the only big game in town in terms of these sort of outreach initiatives. But obviously Prime, what we're celebrating today, is living proof of the fact the sector has developed, and there are lots of other great programs out there offering all sorts of different support to young people all over the country, which is obviously great. I think the challenge though always is showing the link between all of these activities, this focus, this narrative, and actually opportunities expanding, young people having better chances than they otherwise would have done, because that's what we're all in it for. And I think one of the problems about measuring social mobility is it takes a generation really to get a really firm grasp on what's happening. So I think there's a consensus emerging, or has emerged, that mobility is lower in this country than some of our international peers, and there is some evidence it has declined as well. But it's very hard to know exactly what is happening at this moment in time. So we have to look at these leading indicators, and some of those are positive. So for example, there's more disadvantaged young people going to university than ever before, including to the most selective Russell Group type universities. But on the negative side, and I'm sure we'll come on to speak about this, the pandemic has also exacerbated inequalities, particularly in the school system. So the acid test of all of this work will be whether the profession changes. And I was looking back at some of our statistics, and the first time we looked at the backgrounds of top lawyers, 68% of judges were from independent schools, which is a very flawed statistic in some ways, but it does tell you something about disadvantage and how an advantage and how that plays out in the sector. We did it a couple of years ago and it was 65%. So that figure had hardly changed. Now, obviously, it will take a long time for the work we're all engaged in to feed through, but that will be the proof of the pudding. Does the profession change? Do the people at the top of our society better represent all of us? So I guess not at all, Nick, a counsel of despair from me, because I do think progress has been made, but equally no reason to be complacent, I don't think.
Indeed, and that point about progression and not just creating opportunity, but then progression from it, something we'll come on to in a second. So thank you. Sarah, I guess, Social Mobility Foundation, you mentioned your own index, which you track and you use to track both progress and lack of progress in this area. Do you want to share with us the Foundation's own perspective? I know you do work in the legal profession.
Absolutely, Nick. I think when James talks about momentum, we would say we've seen the same in our programme work with law firms and through the index. We've been running the Social Mobility Index for 5 years now. This year, and we'll publish this year's key findings at the top 75 in just a few weeks. We've got over 200 firms who've entered the index and been benchmarked. That's huge growth. And we've also seen a broadening of the sectors who are engaged and involved. When we started, law, finance, professional services and the public sector were completely dominant. It was a niche sport. Now we're seeing broader engagement from wider sectors, retail, technology, gaming, science. We're even seeing some of those new sectors give law and professional services a run for their money in terms of some of the momentum that they've created. So that's a real positive. When we talk to people about social mobility, I think we spend less time talking about why people should care. I think people are quicker to connect and engage with the issues. The resonance of people's background affecting their life chances is much greater than it was. And I think, as James has alluded to, there's an odd silver lining from the pandemic that comes out there. People recognise that the boundaries between personal, domestic, the things that one is dealing with in one's own life and the professional is blurred, and people are readier to acknowledge and talk about that. Some of the themes that are positive that we've seen around the index through our benchmarking, things we hammered at the beginning and we continue to hammer home as the basics of any kind of social mobility approach: collecting socioeconomic background data, linking your outreach and engagement work with schools, children and young people to your recruitment pipeline. We're seeing progress on that. We're seeing firms engage, connect with that, innovate. So collection of data, it's not a perfect world when we look at the law sector, but there is much better collection of data and use of data to track the success of initiatives. And we're certainly seeing better connection between outreach and the recruitment pipeline. We've seen some real innovation. I should hold up the work that Freshfields are doing with us around social mobility cold spots outreach, Linklaters, and they're making links program that they've really pushed themselves to develop and innovate, and many other examples. So there is some good. I will pepper that, as James had, with some concerns. I think when it comes to the legal sector, we've really got to push this conversation about what it will take to translate the outreach and recruitment action into progression. People from low socioeconomic backgrounds thriving in the legal sector and rising to the top. And I think part of that conversation has got to be an honest conversation about how the legal sector recognises and rewards merit. We see, for example, just to pick out, the visits and engagement with universities from law firms over the period we've been monitoring the index has really changed and broadened. Law firms are visiting a broader range of universities, they're engaging in outreach with a wider range of approaches. Lots of law firms have started to build solicitor apprenticeship programs. But when it comes to hiring and progression, the perception that a Russell Group degree at high grade is a necessary qualification to enter and to succeed is really tightly there. So that perception of what merit looks like and how it presents itself, it still takes a bit of unpicking. the work of the City of London Task Force that I'm involved with, and lots of people on this call and listening to this will be involved with, is really pushing the sector to look at what merit, progression, success looks like and requires in this sector. And I think those conversations are critical, not just to ensure that people from low socioeconomic backgrounds can get to the top, that progression track is there, but also to really succeed in our outreach and engagement practice, because we hear from young people all the time that they need to see themselves being able to rise to the top of firms to feel that they can believe in the pathways and the potential. It's hard to encourage them to put in the effort and the requirements if they don't believe they will be, in the end, able to rise to the top. So that's the pathways that we've seen, as James has said, some real momentum, some real innovation, and the sector pushing itself, but also needs to turn that same lens onto merit and progression inside the sector to really be able to develop on that.
And thank you for that, Sarah, because that takes us right into the meat of this morning's discussion, but which is all about progression, really. Before we come on to that, and particularly I like the insight there about, one of the impacts of the pandemic is we've seen the whole human being in our work environments, because we see people in their homes, we see the circumstances in which they live. That's certainly one of the things that I've taken away from this. But before we go into progression in a bit more detail, just Sandra, I want to give you a chance, a view or a voice from both inside the profession and then with the Social Mobility Commission, a hat outside the profession as well. I mean, your reflections on where we are and work still to done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd endorse everything that James and Sarah have said. It's clear that the profession has woken up much more to the social mobility agenda, to improving the statistics, if you like, on socioeconomic diversity within the profession, and that should be applauded. And in fact, I think financial services and other sectors have looked to the legal sector and the progress it's made to say that we need to be in on the action. So I think we should be proud of that. But I absolutely think that there is still a long way to go. We've started really to touch the surface on reflecting on where we want to be as a sector and really putting in the effort in terms of making a real difference. What we've got to ask ourselves is this just about getting a few people through and being able to say, yeah, we've made a bit of progress because we can see a little bit more change, or do we really want to see fundamental change? And that takes a commitment, that takes a real reflection on, are we paying lip service to this, or are we really going to drive change? And I think this goes completely to what Sarah says. Our admission processes are much better. We are looking much better at contextualised recruitment, for example. We're doing better outreach. But people have got to feel that when they join our firms that they belong and that they fit in and that they don't have to change themselves to what we would typically see and view a lawyer to be to progress. And I think that's quite important, the sort of fit and polish that we might try and impose on someone to make them look and feel like we think a lawyer should, can be very off-putting to someone who's strived for a significant period of time to get into the law firm. So I would say yes, absolutely. So social mobility is in the nation's conversation. It is something that is much more prevalent. We've seen it as a commission, and we've done a lot of work as a commission to ensure that employers do understand the agenda, because that was part of the issue. People were saying, how do we really make a difference here? If this is an unseen potential disadvantage, how can we really dig deep and understand what the issues are? And there's been a lot of good work done on data collection, understanding workforces, and also to really drive those programs of inclusivity admission. But we really do need to ask ourselves, are we going to take it so seriously that when it comes to deciding who the next partner is going to be, who the next big job, who's going to be assigned to that big job that's going to be client winning and client fee generating, are we really deciding that on old principles, on old assumptions? So I think it's absolutely, as the other speakers have said, we are making great inroads on entry level, but we need to see that change progression.
Right. Thank you very much. And that point that you're making, difference is not a weakness, it's a strength. And that's one of the points exactly. I think we'll probably come on to. Right, let's get a voice from Arun and Sana. So, I mean, I guess I want to move on to now to that point about progression. So Prime's main task, of course, is the provision of work experience, outreach to students, create maximum engagement. But as Nicholas has already been saying, why invest in people unless we're going to help them excel? And we need to make sure that all of the young people that we give the chances to, they have the chance to progress and progress at the same pace as their peers. So let's speak a bit about that. And Arun, if I can turn to you first, as you said, Prime alumni, indeed a veteran of 5 VAC schemes, which I believe you turned into 5 job offers. So 2 questions for you. One, what is your secret? Secondly, more seriously, can you describe your own journey and I guess what it tells you about a young person's perspective on this conversation?
Sure. On the first point, I think quite a bit of luck. But no, yeah, thanks so much for having me. Just by way of background, I grew up in Birmingham and I was supposed to be a doctor, not because of any family links or anything, but just because, as I think a lot of parents think, who perhaps don't have the full picture in terms of careers and what's out there, is, safe, respectable, that sort of stuff. And then I kind of realised that I might pass out at the sight of blood, so I thought perhaps not best to pursue that. And when it came to law, it was honestly quite random. I didn't know anything about it. And naturally, I kind of went on the pursuit of work experience to try and figure more out. And I took a year out before uni and literally applied to, it must have been over 200 firms in terms of letters, phone calls, emails. And off the back of that, I got kind of 1 3-day work experience somewhere, and that was it. And honestly, that whole experience was totally demoralizing, because I was there wanting to learn about this profession, wanting to know more, wanting to better myself, and just felt like I was getting shut down before it even started, to the extent where kind of commercial corporate law, the city, all that sort of stuff, I was almost ruling myself out of that. Or at least was beginning to, because I just wasn't getting anywhere. And then the prime work experience came along, and that was a huge turning point for me. And I could speak about the benefits of the prime work experience all day, but I think the key takeaway for me is when you go into these firms and you connect with people and you see things in real life, it's a bizarre experience, because everything you imagine and you dream is there in real life. And for the first time, that thing you were imagining and dreaming of, it feels like a real possibility. And that, for me, was very much the fuel which kind of you basically put me through uni and gave me the drive to go through and apply and keep working hard and kind of working at it. So Prime was kind of very influential in that way. In terms of the second point on the perspective of young people, I think regardless of background, especially in the legal profession, everyone knows it's hyper competitive. When you look at some of these firms that take 10, 20, 30 people and thousands of people apply, naturally, I think the initial reaction is, how on earth am I supposed to get through this? And then if you add the layer of, my grades aren't that good, my schooling isn't great, I sound a certain way, I look a certain way, all of a sudden, you just knock yourself out. And I think, naturally speaking, you will kind of want to avoid the disappointment of rejection and almost just not apply, or at least, kind of redirect something else. Or the worst case scenario is just dismiss law as a career altogether. So I think it is really tough. I think, as everyone's mentioned, there's been great progress in terms of firms trying to get people through and kind of having schemes like Prime and all the other schemes that have kind of come out of that has been fantastic. But I still think, as everyone is sort of alluding to, there is a lack of, I see myself here in 10 years' time, because there are multiple people who have taken the same path. And admittedly, there will be an element of this will just take time. But equally, I think firms can be more aggressive in their pursuit of making sure that the kind of makeup of these firms represent what's actually going on, because it's all good saying that we're diverse and saying that we're recruiting from different ways, but the proof's in the pudding. And I think when you're actually in the firm and you see people that you can connect with, that is far more powerful than anything that might be written in a marketing brochure.
Indeed, absolutely right. And again, we're going to come on to that in a minute or two. Sana, again, your perspective, and you gave us a bit of a kind of perspective on what Strive is looking to achieve. But why don't you talk to us about what you've observed and the challenges we've still got?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to say I could not have put the journey better myself, Arun. Like, that was pretty much the entire time you're speaking, I was sitting there going, yep, Yes, that was me. So genuinely, I completely, I just resonate with that journey so much, because to a huge extent, it was my journey. And a lot of what led me to start up Strive in the first instance was actually my experience of going through the process and applying for a training contract, and just kind of realizing at various different stages that actually maybe this profession was not for me, and I should just drop out of the race altogether, because I was never going to belong. I was never going to fit in. I attended a state school that identified me as one of the people that was at risk of gang violence. So you know, this was just when we used to have classes on how to not get involved in gang violence. We used to have classes on knife crime, because these were the issues that were prevalent in my area, and these were the issues that were prevalent in the school that I went to. So in terms of looking beyond that and trying to think about what it is that you wanted to dream of, for most of us, it was just, they were like vague statements, like, yes, I want to be a lawyer, or yes, I want to be a doctor, but it was nothing more than that. And so when I started at uni, which I also got into completely by accident, I missed the application deadline because I realized last minute I didn't want to be a doctor, similar to Arun. I actually wanted to do law. So I missed the application deadline, didn't have a place from anywhere, and rang up Queen Mary and said, hi, do you want to accept me? And I don't know where I got the confidence from to do that, because I was 18 years old and didn't have an application. And so that's how I ended up at Queen Mary. And that actually was a bit of a turning point, because I think if I had gone to a slightly different institution, my experiences would have been wildly different. And one of the things that stood out to me when I was there is that despite Queen Mary being a wonderful university, when I was at assessment centres, I find myself to be that consistent Queen Mary, so as City University representative, i.e. there just wasn't anybody else. I came from any of those other institutions other than the top 10 that law firms typically recruit from. And this was something that came up time and time again. And I just kind of, and I do remember sitting in that room and thinking, oh, I think I find myself in the wrong space entirely. I am in a room full of people that have all either gone to a private school or attended a top tier grammar school or have gone to Oxford, Cambridge, Warwick and Durham, and here I am, a state school girl, a full-on hijabi, speaks with a wrong accent, sounds weird and looks visibly different. I mean, who am I trying to kid out here? This is just not going to work. So a lot of this thought process, a lot of that experiences is really what made me realize that there needs to be something for students that come from my kind of background, students that don't necessarily tick all the boxes on the surface, i.e. they haven't attended the best, they haven't attended the best school, they haven't attended the best university, they don't have a stellar set of the standard work experiences that you would typically look for. My background was in retail. I spent 5 years in retail, worked as a retail manager for quite some time. So very, very different skill set than what would traditionally be expected. And so the reason I just set up Strive was actually to find students who simply through no fault of their own end up in circumstances where they just find themselves unable to prove that they are worthy. And the thing with social mobility is that there is a general lack of awareness, and I think the industry is waking up to it, i.e. why social mobility is important. But I think there is a general lack of awareness and understanding in terms of how exactly it impacts students that are coming through the door, and beyond that, how it impacts the employees once they are through the door. Because it's not just an issue of, oh well, you know, we can do a little bit of contextual recruitment and just on the grades, and then that will be enough to cover all the differences. It is beyond that. When you're looking at somebody who comes from a low social mobility, they will typically have a whole plethora of disadvantage points that maybe someone who's also brown but has attended a private school or has had a private school education wouldn't have. And these are things around knowledge, it's things around access to opportunities, it's access to network, and most crucially, it is also the culture point. Someone like me who had attended a school where we had classes on drug violence, I did not know how to actually sit around a dinner table and eat with chopsticks. It just wasn't something that I had experienced until I actually started coming into the industry. And this is me being completely transparent and open here, because that was one of the things that I remember thinking, oh my gosh, here I am at this Michelin-starred restaurant. I don't know what to do with these chopsticks. I look like an absolute moron. And there's all of these nuances that we just don't understand, because the system as a whole, it's not set up in a way that it understands social mobility both at a recruitment and retention level, because it's such a massive piece of work. It's not an easy fix, and there's a plethora of issues that go into it, and to understand that it's an ongoing piece of work. It requires open conversations. It requires being able to process what the feedback is and being able to implement that. But beyond that, it's also being able to understand that not every candidate that walks in through your door will traditionally look like talent, and that is our job. That's what we do at Strive. Our job is literally to take students who necessarily do not look on paper like they are talented, but who genuinely are some of the most intellectual, some of the most brightest students that we have ever worked with a real hunger to do well, with a real passion to go out there and take over the world and just be themselves in the industries that they are going to. But we have found time and time again that, as Sarah was talking about earlier, there's this real point about perception about what does a good trainee or what does a potential good trainee look like, and trying to move away from that is a bit of a challenge. And we've seen that yes, law firms are now moving to more remote law firms, actually not remote law firms, remote universities where they wouldn't typically attend. But the question then becomes, is that outreach then translating into the number of offers that are being given? And I think that probably isn't the case yet. It is happening, but more needs to be done. And what we are trying to do on our end is taking students from those institutions, from those backgrounds, and really helping them to understand the process, understand the industry, and then put them in front of employers who will hopefully recognize that these students are genuinely very capable, very able, and look past some of the other criteria that they would typically require, i.e. in terms of grades or university, and look beyond those perceptions. So that's just our work on the very, very kind of ground level that we're trying to achieve. But of course, a lot more needs to be done.
And it's a wonderful thing to hear the story from your perspective. An observation of mine, you and Arun are some of the most compelling advocates for the initiatives and the objectives we've got here, because we hear your voice, and somebody like you who's debating whether or not to come in the profession or not, hearing your voice, seeing your story is about as compelling as it gets. And I want to just jump back to Sandra for a second, partly because obviously you're in the profession yourself, and we're talking about progression. So if we've got raised expectation or awareness, we've got people into the profession, the progression piece, and here again, both because you're wearing your DLA hat, but I know the Commission itself has done quite a lot of work, and there's quite a lot of material on its website as well to support employers in the progression piece. So do you want to just talk to us very quickly about that?
Yeah, I think we've all touched on the point, and what we've tried to do as commissioners is really assist employers look at their workforce, understand what some of the issues are, but also challenge them to look at their recruitment practices throughout their organisations. And there's various toolkits at socialmobilityworks.org. So please do visit that if you've not visited that website, to just look at some of the initiatives and the toolkits that we have, and a lot of real life stories and role modelling to help people understand what some of the issues are and how they can best progress that. But what we need to really challenge ourselves about is, to the extent that we are looking at fireside chats or assumptions that have been made about who the client wants and who the client would expect to see, what they look like, what they sound like, and really challenge ourselves to say, is that really what the client wants, or is that what we know and have always assumed? And those sorts of things are what the profession really needs to drill down on now, and not just the entry level requirements. And it's everything that Sana and everyone else has been saying. As a commission, we believe that we have taken a lot of good steps, but that statistically the senior levels of the profession are still dominated by those from more privileged backgrounds. That evidence has been proved by other organisations, the Bridge Group, Sarah and James, I'm sure their organisations will testify to the same thing. So it's really about saying, take a hard look at the organisation and say what really makes a difference in terms of what we're looking for to progress in an organisation. At partner level, what targets are we setting ourselves? Because again, something that's quite controversial, but what often gets targeted, measured, gets done. And the reality is there's no business, there's no law firm that wouldn't set a target for its fee generation, fee income every year and expect lawyers to abide by those, to strive for those. So why shouldn't we do the same in terms of improving our diversity, which we all know will make a difference to the advice we give, the productivity, our innovation, because we've got different voices in the room. So all those things will make our organisations better. So why not challenge ourselves to set some targets on progression as well as admission? And that's the sort of thing the Social Mobility Commission has been pushing for and is provided guidance on in its toolkits.
Great, thank you very much. And I wanted to bring James and Sarah back in here. I mean, James, you hinted at it there, COVID pandemic. We may be starting to emerge from it, but what's the consequence of that? I know the Trust has done a fair bit of research here, and you had a paper out. Do you want to just very quickly just give us that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at the impact of the pandemic on all the sort of phases of education from early years right up to access to the professions. And I guess sort of any conversation on social mobility, you can't avoid the issue of what's happening in schools because that drives so much of this agenda. It's not the only driver, but it's a really important one. And we know that the experience of school closures and lockdown, if you were from a poor background, was very different than if you were from a wealthy background. So schools serving disadvantaged areas struggled to provide the quantity and the quality of online learning as quickly as independent schools and leafy comprehensive and grammar schools. And also for the young people themselves, you know, they struggled with a quiet space to work at home. They'd struggle with internet access, having a good laptop or a tablet to work on. And of course, their parents themselves, you know, well-intentioned, but may not have had a good experience of education themselves, and therefore felt less confident in supporting that homework. So we're starting to see that come out in the statistics in terms of the gap widening, this gap that was there before COVID struck. And of course, we know there's going to be some very immediate effects of that in terms of sort of GCSE and A-level results. But also, this is going to wash through the system for years to come because there are young people in primary school, early secondary school who've missed a substantial portion of their schooling, and they can ill afford to do that because they were already behind. So we'll see that in the system, and that's compounded by, you know, the issues that obviously that every sector had around, you know, access to internships, work experience, apprenticeships. So as Sarah said, there were some silver linings to the pandemic, but overall a sort of a dark cloud for social mobility, I would say.
Right. Sarah, very quick. Well, I'll let you answer that question as well. But there is one thing that Nicholas, as our chairman of Prime, is noted for is his timekeeping, and I'm conscious of our time already. So, I'll let you say one or two quick things on that side of things here as well. But if we can also get you to kick us off with the final thing I want to do, which is what's the ask? You know, what can we do to make ourselves in a situation where in 20 years, or when Prime is no longer needed before the 20th anniversary. So, Sarah, a quick word on the pandemic influence, and then also your one ask, if there were one, for all of our delegates this morning.
No problem, and I can connect them. So I think that building on what James has said, the ongoing volatility post-pandemic, you know, we know that the cohort that we support always struggles the most when there is ambiguity, uncertainty, volatility. And there is so much volatility around how exams and assessments are working, around how university admissions are operating, apprenticeships, and through navigating that change when you have less support network, information is tougher. I think particularly, and again building on what James said, the focus on tutoring and academic recovery in the lower achieving schools risks being at the expense of careers, enrichment activities and skills. Better off schools, more privileged children will still have access to all of that. So that enrichment gap People are not paying enough attention to that widening. And then very much connecting to my ask, so the place-based issue is really quite acute. Cold spots, social mobility cold spots are getting colder. You know, more children are poor in the cold spots. The attainment gap between the poorer children and their privileged peers is growing more quickly in the cold spots. And we're not seeing the focus from government or employers on those cold spots. There's a risk we're stacking up opportunities in some places and others are really missing out. So that's my one ask actually, is for the firms engaged in social mobility at whatever stage of your journey, please think about where you are supporting young people. Please don't just think about the immediate neighbourhood, the places that you're already well connected, or the links that you already have. Please think about what you can offer to young people in the parts of the country that are being neglected. Push yourselves as to what you can do, because if we saw that acted on in the next 10 years, we'd see some really positive things follow from that.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah, and obviously cold spots being one of the initiatives. Arun, over to you. I have my pen, I am taking notes.
Sure, I think that kind of in addition to what everyone else has said, I also think just kind of speaking about this stuff is really, really important, because I'm sure there are people who are quite senior who have masked themselves and kind of blended themselves into everyone else. If they actually just step up and actually say, no, actually, I'm from a different background, it's unbelievable what impact that can have. Just a quick story. I actually grew up on top of a fish and chip shop. My parents worked in, and this senior partner at White & Case recently, well, a few months ago, wrote a report on what makes a good trainee and all that sort of stuff. And in the first paragraph, he spoke about growing up on top of the chip shop in Leeds. And it was the first time I had ever seen anything. It blew my mind. Obviously, that's very coincidental. But before then, I had never actually mentioned the chip shop to anyone in any circumstance. And in hindsight, maybe I was embarrassed. Maybe I didn't want to kind of mention it. Maybe it felt a bit abnormal. But just seeing someone who was in that position saying that in front of everyone was astonishing. So I think my one ask is, if you do know people, or if you are that person yourself, please just say it out loud, because you don't actually know who you are impacting and kind of what level of influence you actually may be having.
Great, thank you very much. So we're going from Vionia with Tony Kent to chopsticks with Sana, and now chip shops. So thank you very much. James next, and I'm conscious of time. So what's your one ask for the audience?
So I completely agree with what Sarah said about the cold spots and also the progression thing. I guess my one ask is just to stick with it for the long haul, because although we've had this momentum, it takes a long time to change these things. The pendulum swings back, things come in, there's new facts, but actually we want to make sure we're addressing this over the next 10 years. I think Prime will still be needed in 10 years. I think social mobility is an arms race, and every time we help disadvantaged children, the advantage will find a way for them to rise to the top. So we're always going to be needed, and we must make sure the focus remains on this issue.
Thank you very much, James. Sana.
I would say, echoing what James said earlier, is focus on results and stay alert. I think staying alert is key. We cannot get complacent with the progress that we have made or are making, because as everyone knows, complacency is a killer of all achievements. And I really want to emphasize the focusing on results bit. When you're thinking about the resources that you're putting out there, when you're thinking about the outreach programs you're implementing and the strategies that you want to bring in to make social mobility a thing of the past, I think focusing on results is key. Trying to be more mindful about where your resources are going and thinking about the organizations that you partner up with. Is it, really doing a little bit of deeper research and thinking about, are we really getting the results that we need, or are we getting the results that make us look good merely because of association? So it's that distinguishment between, are we doing this for a little bit of marketing clout to look good, i.e. we look diverse and we look like we're doing something, or are we doing something that is genuinely resulting in lasting change across the industry and across your own firm? And that, I think if we can just do that one thing, that probably will keep us going for the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sandra.
I'll be very brief. I'm conscious of time. I would just say, make sure the organisation creates a culture that means people want to stay, because there's no point attracting people and then trying to change them or making them feel that they're an imposter in the environment. So make sure the culture is such that it's inclusive once they're there.
Very good, and that's a very good way to end. So thank you very much to my panel. I'll just add a quick sales pitch for Prime if I can. I mean, by joining Prime, of course, you join a bunch of like-minded firms. One, as Nicholas said, I think in his introduction, we compete fiercely with each other, of course, for clients and for talent, but we collaborate proudly as well. And that's something that struck me in all my time of engagement with Prime. You get access to best practice, you get access to tools and experience of other organisations, and it allows each of us to play our part in the profession's commitment to improve the life chances of students. And that is wherever they're born, or whoever their parents are, or wherever they were educated. And on that note, can I say thank you very much to my panellists. And one of the hardest parts, of course, about virtual gatherings, apart from discovering that you're being drawn whilst you're speaking, is that the round of applause that we can achieve, I'm afraid, is going to be virtual too. I know if we were in person, there would be a ringing round of applause for each of you. So can I say thank you very much to each of our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And so it falls now to me just to draw together the first part of this morning's discussions and what I've taken from Tony's really compelling introduction from the discussion that Sarah was having and the discussion we've just had just now. So I guess what do I take from that? First, social mobility has moved to the mainstream. Second, we have the organisations, the structure, the reports, the policy, as we mentioned, all around it. Third, we have colleagues and we have recruits who demand action. Fourthly, society and indeed clients are also demanding our action, and our collective and individual commitment to these objectives, I think, is increasingly going to impact upon their decisions to engage with us or not to engage with us. Simply put, our organisation's commitment to this agenda is like its commitment to net zero or other kind of societal level objectives. It becomes a hygiene factor in the selection of law firms, both by recruits and I think by clients. And lastly, I think I would conclude that we have made progress. As Nicholas said, 7,500 young people have had a window into our profession in the time that Prime has been operating. More remains to be done, both to allow more folk to have that window, but also to ensure that those from challenged backgrounds have the same opportunities to make progress. And that's the point we've really been discussing, isn't it? The opportunity to make progress and to progress at the same pace as their fellow colleagues. And it is the case that the last 18 months events have only accelerated the importance of our work. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this panel session. Please ensure that you visit the exhibitors area if you haven't already, which is also on the portal. And please be back with us promptly at 10:25 for part 2, where we'll hear from Tony Kent and Stephanie Boyce, who's president of the Law Society, before we'll go into the individual breakout rooms. But from me, thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the rest of this morning's event.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the conference. It's my pleasure to bring you back into the room. So I'm wondering if you have heard the phrase, bring your whole self to work. It sounds lovely and inclusive, but I'm not sure that it is always sincerely meant. And it can be a bit of a tricky thing to navigate when you have come into corporate industry as someone from a low social and economic background. So I'll give you maybe a couple of examples. One was when I met with a colleague and a friend, and we were talking about family parties. So my mum comes from an enormous family. Her grandmother had 11 children. I mean, why would you do that? And so there used to be these very big extended family get-togethers, and there'd often be a massive buffet on the go, and there might be food left over at the end of the evening. And I was telling a friend about this, we were swapping stories, and I said, oh yeah, and then if there was a load left over, they might like put some in a bin liner and give them to my mum and we'd take them home. And I thought this was a fairly innocuous thing to say. It was true. And the response that I got was, that is disgusting. And I remember thinking, but I was just sort of telling you a story. And then I was made to feel, firstly, that I felt a bit defensive. Then I felt maybe I should be apologetic, and I felt a bit ashamed. And I said, well, it was a clean bin liner. And it was in sharing my experiences that I came to realise that maybe it was bring your whole self to work, but not that bit. But it can work in a really positive way. So speaking to somebody else about, what did you do at the weekend? There was kind of a group of us together, and you might get, I went to Hatton Gardens to go look at some diamonds, very nice, or booked my honeymoon to Bora Bora. That was a thing for a while. Or, I went down to Handball and sailed for the weekend. And I'd had a weekend where I took my mum to visit my brothers in prison. So I've been to prison 3 times, only as a visitor, but I love the cute little lockers that you put your stuff in that you're not supposed to pass across the table. And at a company event a few weeks later, and this is why we need to talk about this. So people had all been drinking, and I used to get those come to Jesus moments where people would come to me and say, "Oh, Tony, I'm so glad you spoke about that, because this is happening in my life as well." And a guy had come up to me and said, "I'm really glad you spoke about your brothers, Tony, because my brother is in prison and I don't know how to tell anyone about it." And he felt ashamed to bring that part of himself to work. And as we know from what Tish and Sarah and the rest of the team were talking about earlier, the impact of what's going on in our personal lives does affect us at work. And my experience of social mobility was one of it being a solo journey. So whilst I have achieved it, and according to the IFS, I think I hopped from the 10th decile to 80th decile of income within this, by the time I was 26. I mean, this is unusual. This is not normal, but my family was still there. And it cuts both ways. So I know if I would take my kids back to see my family, we would get little issues over the use of language. So took my kids to see my mum, and we're going to have a spot of lunch. And my son has said, "Mum, where's the cutlery?" And you would think cutlery is a fairly innocuous word, right? Well, no, that is the C word in my family's house. They're like, "What do you mean cutlery? What is wrong with saying knife and fork?" And you find yourself in this position where you're like, well, if I speak like this here, it's incorrect. And if I speak like this here, I also don't fit. So in my last meeting I had with social services, because there's still some stuff I have to do there to help my family, I was told that I sounded professional, and they forget that I'm a family member because of the way that I talk. And then when I spoke to one of my mum's friends, she said, "You talk like a social worker." And I don't like social workers. So I'm going, I don't understand how I'm supposed to speak or where I'm supposed to fit. And now I've come to find that this is often called code switching. And my children will pick me up on it. They'll say, "Oh, Mum, when you talk to your sister, you talk like Well Basingstoke." And it becomes something that is actually quite tiring to deal with. And I was trying to figure out, how do I combine the things that relate to my upbringing, some of the things that I used to love. I had a massive passion for rap music. I'm playful. I like language. I like having fun. And how do I combine that with where I find myself today, operating in a very middle class environment? So I found a way to do it. And I have been told that it's always better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So I'm going to do this for you. Oh, yeah. But this is happening. Let's go. I'm cruising into town, the traffic's bumper to bumper. I've got jigsaw jeans, I've got a whistles jumper. The kids are in the back, my boy's a little prankster. What off to Waitrose? Yeah, I'm a middle class gangster. I'm rocking style in the aisle in my Dewberry boots. I'm here to buy French cheese and exotic fruits. I'm picking up the lilies, they're £10 a bunch. And I'm picking up some sushi for my daughter's packed lunch. The vegetables I'm packing, well, they're always organic. And if I can't find avocados there, I'm starting to panic. I'm buying quinoa and couscous and wild brown rice. I'm filling up my trolley and I'm not checking the price. My girlies like Prosecco, my man likes Releo, and to counteract the gin I drink, I'm juicing the kale. I take omega-3 for my brain potential, and I bought this truffle oil because the label said essential. I'm a middle-class gangster, I'm a gangster for life, and if you try to step to me, I'll pull a Laura Ashley knife. I'd love to talk all night, but this is where it ends because I'm off for kitchen supper with my middle-class friends. Peace out. Well, I mean, I really hope you enjoyed that. And I would like to thank you for indulging me and inviting a different voice to join you today. Now I get to do something that it was quite a moment for me, because I'm more used to conversations about, time at the bar, please, than being called to the bar. And I've been given something that actually makes me feel like, I've been given a whole tray of precious things to carry, and I'm really nervous. But I get to introduce to you your opening speaker for the second part of the conference. It is my absolute privilege to introduce the President of the Law Society of England and Wales. It's Stephanie Boyce.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boyce, and I am the President of the Law Society of England and Wales. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you here this morning and to introduce these breakout sessions, all centred around something very dear to my heart: ensuring the sector which we all work in can become more fair, more diverse, and more representative. And there is still much more to be done if we are to achieve what we are aiming for: a legal profession that reflects the society it serves. And this is not just a moral necessity, just as our legal system's international reputation and the reputation of those that practice within it rest in part on ensuring universal access to justice within the United Kingdom. It also rests on ensuring that the legal profession is representative. We cannot claim that our legal system is the best it can be when we know that many talented people from non-traditional backgrounds are unable to join or advance in our profession. And there is no one button to press marked make solicitors, barristers, judges, legal execs, arbitrators diverse. This is a complex issue with many factors, but the first step is identifying the root causes and looking to counter them. And that is why we at the Law Society are trying to do regarding solicitors. Aspiring lawyers want a more diverse sector. Clients want a more diverse sector. And most of the profession wants a more diverse sector. Now we must deliver. And what's interesting about the legal sector compared to others is that it is quite diverse in terms of intake. A recent Law Society member survey found that 52% of practicing solicitors were female. 17.5% from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, 5% were LGBT+, and 16% reported a long-term physical or mental health condition or illness. So then we have a more diverse junior segment, differentiating us from other industries. But like many other sectors, we have much less diversity at senior levels, particularly in larger firms. Women now represent 31% of partners in private practice in large law firms. Black, Asian, and minority ethnic solicitors, meanwhile, represent only 8% of partners. And this figure has only changed by 1% since 2014. So when I became president of the Law Society, I said it was my mission to leave a profession more diverse and inclusive than the one I entered. And I'm clear that this must be a shared ambition, with each and every one of us playing our part. And this still remains true, and it is apparent that the main challenges facing those from backgrounds atypical for the profession lie in retention and progression. On social mobility, our latest statistics suggest that just over half of practicing solicitors are the first generation in their family to attend university. Despite the increase in diversity in the profession, challenges remain in ensuring equal opportunities and progression and a culture of inclusivity. For example, 23% of practicing solicitors attended independent or public schools, compared to only around 7% of the population of England and Wales. There are also external factors that make it more difficult for aspiring solicitors from less privileged socio-economic backgrounds to enter the profession, such as difficulties in getting access to work experience and a lack of finance or guidance from social or family connections. There is clearly still room for improvement, and the Law Society is committed to ensuring that anyone with the necessary skills, knowledge and commitment to become a solicitor is supported, enabled and empowered throughout their career, regardless of gender, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, race, background. So social mobility is going to be one of our biggest work streams in the coming year, and we look forward to working with the profession to secure further real change. But I'm keeping you now from your breakout sessions. The breakout sessions deal with development, progression and outreach, fair selection routes into the profession and virtual work experience. So thank you very much for listening to me this morning. And now please make your way back to the homepage and choose your breakout room. Thank you.